year ago, I wrote words that I've never written before. These are the words. Marketing has been changed forever today. I didn't write those words when the internet started. It took us a few years to figure it out. I didn't write those words with social media. These bold words were written after trying ChatGPT for the first time. Here we are a year later. I'm saying those words again. Last week, OpenAI offered this new opportunity to create custom GPTs. Any person can do very sophisticated computer programming, essentially just by telling ChatGPT what you want in your own language, in your own writing style. I mean, I've tried it. It doesn't even matter if there are misspellings. Starting this week, I have become a computer coding genius. I've never taken a coding class in my life. It's just unimaginable. Computer coding is now works like your mind. You can build what you imagine. Now, this is everywhere. There's a lot of hype about this right now. It's in the news, but I want to focus today on the near-term business advantages we can foresee. Let's cut through the hype. And the focus really has to be on near term, because let's face it, that's all we can think about right now. This is changing every day. I want to talk about what's here, what's now, what's possible, and there's no better person on earth to discuss this with me than my friend Paul Roetzer. Now, I could go on and on about what an awesome guy Paul is, but that would just take up our time. Paul is the CEO and founder. A few years ago, he made a very bold move, created the Marketing AI Institute. He's also the co-host of the Marketing AI Show podcast. I am a subscriber. I highly recommend that you subscribe too. It's just a wealth of information. Paul, welcome. So glad to have you here today.
It's an honor to be with you. I appreciate the invite. I know it's kind of a unique format, and it's a unique time we find ourselves in. So I think conversations like this are important for us all to figure this out together.
So I know this is just sort of slammed into all of us, and but I know you've done a little experimentation with this. Yeah. So let's just start off a little bit, like setting the stage about what's different. So, I mean, in ChatGPT, it was sort of like a shortcut to, create some content or to get some ideas. But what's different now, you can, like, I uploaded my own blog posts and created a MarkBot. You can create your own data. You can connect your own spreadsheets. You can tell this thing how to behave in a way that you want it to behave. And I guess there's even going to be an opportunity, if you build something really cool, you can sell this thing on the store. So as you're experimenting with this, did I miss anything? Is that sort of the gist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the basic concept, like if people haven't played around with GPTs yet or gone in and looked at, like, there's an explore section in ChatGPT where you can go see, ones that OpenAI has built as demonstrations. It's basically a custom ChatGPT. So it's like the experience you would have at ChatGPT, but when you go into ChatGPT now, you start from scratch with your prompts. Like you can configure it a little bit, but generally speaking, it's just this general model that can help you do all kinds of different things. But with the GPTs, you can kind of customize it for specific uses. And so you can go in and do configuration that it then remembers each time you go in. As you mentioned, you can upload files. But really, I think you hit on the key piece. It gives non-developers the ability to all of a sudden build tools. And so for us marketing strategists, in the room, you start thinking about all the knowledge that you've codified through all these years that are sitting in documents and these processes and frameworks. And it's like, wait, I can turn that into a tool now. And so, like, the first one I talked about, trying to build is, we teach everyone you need generative AI policies in your company. Well, that's fine. And I can, like, give you a template and everything. But what if instead I just gave you a tool to build your own generative AI policies based on, like, a series of questions? And so that's how I started looking at it, was all these frameworks and processes that we've developed as marketers, as business professionals. We could now build tools around those things. And that's really exciting to me.
Yeah. So I think this sort of prompts a question that might be on everyone's mind. So look, you're a bright guy. You're very well respected, and people pay you to help them create these AI policies. And now you create this little, GPT bot to do this for you. Is this enhancing what you do, or is this going to be taking revenue away from you, or is it a little bit of both? What's the opportunity? What's the threat here?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of look at it almost like we've all dealt with gated versus ungated content through the years, and how much you put on your podcast and blog and how much you kind of keep, confidential, and you only tell when you're getting paid. And I think for the most part, all of us, we've written books, we've run events, like we've all kind of defaulted over the last decade plus that the more you share, the more respect and authority you gain, and people are going to want to pay you regardless. Like, I mean, there's talks that I have on YouTube. You could go watch the full talk right now, but someone's still going to pay you to come and do that same talk live. And so I always, like, when I'm trying to explain like our world to non-marketing people, non-authors, I always use musicians as the example. It's like you could go listen to that song for free right now on Spotify or Apple or like wherever you listen to music. But if that person comes to town, you're going to pay the $300 to go see them live. And that's how I think about what we do. It's so much about that personal experience, the conversations, the interaction in person. And if I've heard the talk 5 times, like Mark, I've seen you talk a million times, like I'll come every time because it's a different experience. So I don't really worry too much about the giving it away. I don't think it's much different than how the procedures we've followed the last decade plus.
Yeah, let me build on that a little. I think there's a very clear analogy here between this and what we experienced in the early days of content marketing,
Yeah.
where it was sort of mind blowing that the best practice was to give away all your best ideas, because if you didn't, somebody else would. So and then just like you said, I mean, I could write about whatever and give away all my free ideas, but people still want you. I think the other key point here is that people will only come to you. You will only be able to transcend this tsunami of content and tsunami of bots if you're known, right? So you're known. You've become respected in the industry. You're still going to be the guy, the go-to guy for this. And I think that's really important. So talk a little bit. Let's get into what's most interesting to me here, because I'm seeing this. We're still kind of in like the magic trick phase, right? Of these personal GPTs. Where do you think this is going to land in terms of a framework for a business to say, what's the filter, Paul, that you might go through and say, under this condition, in this scenario, if you have this kind of data, this is going to be perfect for you. So help us sort through how a business struggling to figure this out for the first time might process and prioritize how they could unleash this new technology for themselves.
Yeah, I think it starts with just experimentation, honestly. It's like you got to get in and realize what are they actually capable of? Because even for me, I saw the announcement just like you. I was like, okay, this is a pretty big deal, but I got to get in and see how they actually work. And so the first thing I did was went into the Explore tab. And now I have ChatGPT Plus. I think you need a Plus or Enterprise account right now to actually play with these things. But you should be paying the $20 a month for ChatGPT Plus anyway.
Yes.
So although I think they actually like throttled back getting new accounts right now because the demand became so high. I don't know that you can get a ChatGPT Plus account at the moment,
I read that too.
but it's changing. So I think you have to go in and play around with the ones in Explore. There's when I looked at this one, there's like 15 to 20 examples that OpenAI built example tools. So go in, play around with those, then go in and create your own. Go into the configure options, see what the prompts are that you're going to put in. You give it a name, you tell it what it is, give it some sample starting questions, and you just start to kind of play around and see what's possible. And then from there, like have a little sandbox of like things you could build. And so that's how I started. It's like, man, what would I even build? And I started just kind of playing around with ideas. And then you need to kind of understand, like, you can build private ones. So you can build things just for you. And that's what I've done to date, just playing around with things I haven't made public yet. You can build ones that you then share with other ChatGPT Plus and enterprise customers that they can go in and interact with your tools. And then you'll eventually be able to actually put it in the marketplace and partake in revenue in theory. They haven't really been very clear exactly how that's going to work yet. So I think for businesses and for professionals, I would probably start with the private tools. Like, think about things you can build that will just help make you more efficient, more productive, more creative. Like, what are the prompts you're just using over and over again? Like, just configure a GPT to help you do that. Like, so for example, a couple of things that came to mind that I have not built yet was a podcast episode summary writer. So we do this already. Like, we transcribe our podcast, we put it into the script, we then take the transcript out of the script, we put it into Claude or GPT plus, we write a summary of the, like, I can just train a GPT to just do that. You are a podcast summary writer. Here's what you do. Here's the format you follow. And now I've built this thing that we can just use to quickly do the thing I was doing 3 steps with before. And so I started looking at stuff like that. I started thinking about like training things we do internally, like frameworks we put people through to learn how to do processes or create specific documents. And like, I could just create all of those. And so that's how my mind started working. Then you start to say, okay, well, how do we now use this in a growth mindset? Like, how do we use it to grow our audience, to create more value for our community, to build tools? And so I think you kind of, again, once you realize what they're capable of, your mind starts to almost build your sandbox in these couple different ways: personal productivity tools versus value creation tools for my community and my audience versus revenue generating tools that are like either lead gen tools or, beyond that. And again, I figured this kind of out in about 30 minutes. Like, granted, I maybe have a little bit more background in some of this stuff than some people, but it is not overly complicated
No,
to
not
figure
it's
out and
not at
start
all.
playing with.
Yeah. So let me build on a couple points. And the first one is, Paul sort of recommended that everybody do this, and everybody, just spend the $20. And look, I just can't emphasize this enough. If you want to be relevant in this world, go play with this. Figure it out. It's kind of fun. It's kind of addictive. Do not be afraid of it. You have got to be dabbling in this. You've got to be figuring this out, because it's just a matter of time before your company turns to you and say, how do we use this thing around AI? The other thing I want to build on is, I think this is an important point, Paul, that you started with patterns, things that are sort of repetitious. So I started thinking about, for my own business, like, what processes do I have? Like, for you, it was the AI policy builder. You might walk people through a series of questions that's repeatable. Could you, implement that in ChatGPT? Now, I'll tell you an epiphany I had of where it didn't work. So I thought about my own personal coaching around personal branding. I do this a lot. And so there's like certain questions that seem to get to a truth. So I started playing around with this. Could I codify this in ChatGPT? And here's what I realized. For me, a breakthrough occurs when I hear a change in their voice. Like, when we're going through this set of questions, and all of a sudden they get, there's a step change. They're excited. And you say, aha, that's it. Let's go there. There's something there. You can't put that in ChatGPT. That's, that, at least not yet. That's got to be something that's not a pattern. The other thing I learned is this thing still makes a lot of mistakes.
Absolutely.
I mean, I was dealing with HAL, the computer from Space Odyssey, 2001 Space Odyssey. I mean, I kept saying, do this, do this, do this. And it would just forget about it and do its own thing. And I was like begging it. And at one point I said, I'm mad at you. Stop doing this. Do it my way. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I think I disappointed you. Let me do this. And then they would get it once, and then it would just flop again. So you actually had some wisdom that I want to unearth from your recent podcast about advice you got from Ethan Mollick. Ethan is someone I read his newsletter, respect him very much. And Ethan passed along sort of this pattern that I wish I thought about this in this structure before I started playing with this. And Ethan said, define a role and a goal. So you started this for us, right, Paul?
Mm-hmm.
You said you are a podcast summarizer, right? So tell the computer what role you're going to play. What is it supposed to do? Provide step-by-step instructions and then guide it through different documents and content that might help develop the expertise, and then tell it what not to do. So, I mean, for me, it was like, stop numbering it in this stupid way. Stop, so I'm still playing around with it, but it's not perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Mark, that the point you're making is extremely important here, which is this is just a wrapper on top of ChatGPT. So whatever flaws ChatGPT has, they still exist within this. Now, you giving it some files to reference and things may reduce the flaws in ChatGPT, may limit the hallucinations a little bit, so it might not make up as much stuff. But it is not a reliable tool that you're going to just trust it's going to output everything correctly, even if you give it data to reference. So I do think you have to be aware it's still going to hallucinate and make stuff up. So if you're letting it be your representation as your personal brand out there, it may go off the rails. And so you have to like understand that it might just say things that you wouldn't ever say to someone. Also, the data you submit to it at the moment belongs to OpenAI. So like if you're going to give it some training data or some files, unless you have a ChatGPT enterprise account with a separate licensing agreement, you're under the terms of your ChatGPT Plus account, which is basically anything you input or output, OpenAI keeps and can train their future models on. So, I think there are these limitations. It really is just going like into ChatGPT, but someone's like configured it to do a very specific thing, but it's still using the same core model that you would be using if you went into ChatGPT.
So you bring up some really interesting points here. Let's go a little deeper there with some of the legal issues we should think about. I mean, there's many people that listen to this show that work for a big company or a big brand that are quite conservative, perhaps, when it comes to the legal implications. So if you're experimenting this with as a marketer, how do you need to involve your legal department? How do you need to proceed with this in a way where you can explore and innovate and not get yourself fired?
Yeah, so the reason I started building the generative AI policy builder as my first thing is because I think it's one of the most important things brands, agencies, everybody should be doing right now for the exact reason you just outlined. People don't know what they're allowed to do. They don't know how to responsibly use these tools. You don't go into OpenAI and they're like, oh, by the way, warning, like everything you're giving us, we're keeping, and we may train on it. And like, they don't go out of their way to tell you how to use the tool and what like you need to be aware of as a user of the tool. So what we keep trying to guide is, I don't care if it's the CMO, the CIO, the CTO, the head of HR, like someone has to take the lead establishing generative AI policies. Now, if you're in a bigger enterprise, especially if you're in a highly regulated industry, they're going to be very tightly constrained policies. And as much as we hate that as marketers, it is for your own protection at the moment. So we really need to tell our team, again, when I think generative AI and we get outside of just ChatGPT, you have language generation, image generation, video generation through like Runway, things like that. You have audio generation. I just put something on LinkedIn today about the VP of audio at Stability leaving because he doesn't believe in the fair use policy that's guiding the building of their foundation model for audio. Like these are sticky issues. And so you need to give the team guidance at every level of, okay, here is how you're allowed to use responsibly text generation tools. Here's how you're allowed to do image generation tools. Here's how you're allowed to use GPT tools. And it needs to say, like, what data are you allowed to use? Are we allowed to create public facing content? If we create public facing content, how do we acknowledge the role of AI in those things? Like there's these kind of series of questions, and like it might help. I'll tell you like the couple questions I was building into the policy builder, which once I finish it, I'll make it public. But I said, you're a business leader charged with defining policies that guide your company's use of generative AI, text, image, video, audio, and code tools. You will go through a series of questions to determine guidelines for both internal and external applications. And so the questions are the same for each category, but it says, are employees allowed to use AI tools to generate external text-based content such as blog posts, social shares, advertisements? Are employees allowed to use AI tools to generate internal text-based content, such as emails, reports, and presentations? Are they allowed to use AI tools to edit text-based content? Do employees have to disclose their use of AI in final outputs for internal audiences and final outputs for external audiences? So that's like the simplest form of this. And now do that for images and video and audio and code. And just that gives you the starting point for what are our policies. And I can tell you point blank, having talked to many large enterprises, they don't have these answers. All they have is legal saying you can or cannot use ChatGPT, and it's turned on or turned off by IT. That's like the extent of most businesses right now.
Right. And look, I've been there. I've worked for big companies. I've worked with big companies, and in general, I find that the legal department, they really do want to help. I mean, their job is to keep you out of jail. So they're my friends. And I mean, don't go rogue here, because I think there are some pretty important implications. So another thing, Paul, let's talk a little bit about speed. So, you've positioned yourself as sort of a thought leader in this industry, and I'm getting a lot of value from my community, because people are coming to me, they're coming to the whole community with new ideas, and they're testing things, and they're kind of saying, well, this is where we need to focus, or this thing didn't really work that well. How are you staying sane in this world right now? How are you staying sane when, I mean, I saw this chart the other day that was mind blowing. I've been using it in some of my presentations, where it showed that the early iterations of AI took years in the first challenges to meet or exceed human capability in something like image recognition. And then it took, months, and now it's taking weeks. I mean, it really is that explosive. And part of it is being driven. There's a lot of money in this field right now. So how are you, what's your strategy to stay sane? Just give us a little comfort here, Paul.
Yeah, it is a lot. Like it's a heavy topic for a lot of people. And I think, like, I have extreme empathy for people who are afraid of it. And like, it's very uncertain what it's going to happen, especially if you're like a writer or an SEO professional or content marketer. Like, it's hard to predict what 12 months from now looks like. So the only thing I know to do for like our community and just broader, even just the general workforce, is AI literacy. Like, all I can do is advance understanding as quickly as possible. I talk with heads of universities. I mean, you teach, Mark. Like, it's on, like, universities are having a really hard time right now figuring out how do we prepare students for this world? How do we move quick enough within school systems? Government agencies are having issues. Businesses are having issues. So for me, the way I like sleep at night is like, did I do enough today to advance understanding of AI? I don't worry about the money. I don't worry about any of that stuff. It's just like, this is like the core North Star for me, is like AI literacy at scale, as far and wide as we can go. Now, how we achieve that and how I personally stay up on it, you just develop a system. And so for me, honestly, like, Twitter is the primary engine for me. I have a very highly curated list of people that I follow, the heads of the research labs, key people within those companies, to where you get a sense of like a pulse of what's going on and maybe what's coming. And so I try and kind of filter through that daily. And then there's just other people you follow to get a sense of like what is happening right now and where's it going next week. And honestly, our podcast is the only thing that's enabled us to do this, because it's a forcing function that once a week we stop and curate the 30 to 50 things we read or watched that week and pick the 7 to 10 that we're going to talk about that Monday. But I have read the 30 to 50 things and listened to 10 podcasts. And so, like, it's just constant consuming of information and synthesizing it to say what actually matters here. And it's the only way that I know how to do it at the moment. But it honestly, like, there are some weeks where it's just like I just want to turn it off, like, and your head just done. And I was having one of those weeks this week, honestly. Like, it's just it becomes a lot to process. And I think when you allow I think what happens to me is when I sit down and have conversations with people who think very deeply about the bigger issues around AI, that's the stuff that weighs on me. Laws and regulations, disinformation campaigns, and, impact on kids. And like, that's the stuff I really think about in my quiet moments. And sometimes it overwhelms me, and you have to kind of like switch gears in your mind.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's, well, when I was at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, there was a futurist there, and I apologize, I can't remember what think tank she was from, but I mean, what they do is they talked about what are the big mega trends, and how will these things play out, and what is the probability that it will result in something good or something catastrophic. And when it came to AI, this think tank said there's an 80% chance that it will result in something catastrophic in the next 3 years. But it's almost like you can't keep that in the front of your mind, because honestly, there's nothing you and I can do about that.
Yeah.
On a big existential level. So we just need to stay sane. And
Yeah, and Mark, real quick, I'll add one thought there, because it's
yeah,
something that I think about a lot and I get asked about a lot: the existential threat to humanity, because it's getting all the headlines. The way I equate this, the best analogy I can come up with is an asteroid may hit the Earth tomorrow and wipe us all out.
mhm,
It's a possibility. It's a non-zero possibility that it happens.
mhm,
Do I want every leading scientist in the world thinking about that? No. I want like a couple of the top scientists thinking deeply about that.
mhm,
I much prefer that the other ones are working on the things that we know have a higher probability of impacting us, like climate change and hunger and like things like that. And that's
yeah,
how I feel about AI. Yes, it could, in theory, have this catastrophic event on us, but the reality or the probability of that is so low. But we know misinformation, disinformation, threats to democracy, like deep fakes of like teenage girls, like that stuff is real and it's happening right now. And I want more researchers working on that. And
yeah.
it's where I kind of choose to try and push my efforts toward, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that is a concern, that the bad people working on the disinformation are certainly outnumbering the good people trying to push it down. Yeah, so really, just I mean, this is just the beginning of this discussion. It's going to be a discussion that will be affecting us for the rest of our lives. You were talking about spreading the information, just educating people, and I teach a university class in content marketing. I just scrapped the whole class, and I'm going to spend most of my class talking about AI.
Mm-hmm.
talk about a personal change. Well, Paul, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you just remind everyone once again where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, marketinginstitute.com is our home base. You can find a bunch of free resources there. You mentioned the podcast and the newsletter are like the best way to stay up weekly on everything going on. It's where we synthesize everything. And then LinkedIn and Twitter are the two places I'm most active